Hello and welcome to the Trusted Advisor, a channel-focused podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. I'm Jim Roddy, your host for today. Thank you so much for joining us. This pod and video series is designed specifically for point-of-sale resellers and software developers, and our goal is to educate you on the topics of technology, leadership, management, sales, marketing, and other small business best practices. Today on the podcast, we'll be talking about the future of the retail IT channel with two special guests. Rick Feuling is the CEO of RITE Enterprises, a VAR in Sartell, Minnesota, that's northwest of the Twin Cities, and he's also the CEO of Cloud Retailer, a hybrid cloud POS system for independent merchants. Rick has been an RSPA member for 9 years, and in 2018 was recognized as a rising star by the RSPA's Next Gen community. Rick, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Oh, glad you're here. And also, our second guest is David Gosman. He's the Global Hospitality Segment Manager at HP and is the former CEO of point-of-sale software developer PC America. He's been an active member of the RSPA for 15 years, recently completing his 6th year on the RSPA Board of Directors, and at Retail Now 2019, he was named RSPA Chair-elect. Congratulations, and great to talk with you, David.
Thanks, Jim. Looking forward to the dialogue.
Me too. That makes two of us, and I guess three of us, if we, assuming that Rick is excited about.
I'm not on board. Not on board.
You'll have to warm up to it. Is that what it'll be? Time will tell.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get there.
Well, before we get to our questions, our audience might be wondering why we're featuring two guests instead of a more traditional one-on-one interview that you hear on other podcasts. And here's why. The biggest strengths of the RSPA is the community and the partnerships that can be forged, and sometimes where you least expect them. So that's what we're going to do on many of the episodes of the Trusted Advisor, is show the RSPA community in action by having guests share their unique perspectives and see where the conversation takes us. This is what happens every day among RSPA members, and we thought it'd be interesting to share that with you. All right, let's rock and roll. So my first question, our topic today is about the future of the retail IT channel, so we can take this in pretty much any direction, but let's start from a technology standpoint. What technology or technologies do you think VARs and ISVs in the retail IT channel need to pay attention to most over the next 18 to 24 months? So more of the short term. So what do you think will have a significant impact? And Rick, if you can go first and then David follow up afterwards.
Yeah, so I think, in the next 2 years, a shift that's going to occur is the end customer's expectations are going to significantly change in terms of the technology that they're using at stores. So, I went to Home Depot this weekend. I was telling David about some projects I got going on, and I didn't get my receipt emailed, and I was a little frustrated by that. And, that's an example of a technology that right now is a nice to have, but I think as over the next couple of years, things like that are not going to be optional anymore. Being able to pay with your phone at the store won't be optional. Customers being able to get feedback on their purchase, or even an independent merchant having a fully functional omni-channel website. Being able to see what is in stock at the store. I think in the next 2 years, these things are going to become no longer optional.
Got it. So it's not so much some unbelievable technology. You're talking about some of these fundamental things have to be in every single retail establishment.
Correct. Yep, exactly.
Rick, what are you seeing? I'm sorry, David, what are you seeing for the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, I think it's actually building off Rick's point a little bit. And, maybe I'll actually open up a little anecdote or story here, is that working right now, our Latin American team is bringing up about 15 big customers from throughout Latin America that want to see some of the big innovations happening in retail in the US, focusing in New York City. So while I was scouting out a bunch of different sites, and it's a really eye-opening experience just looking at all these different modern retailers, I happened to be sitting in some little kind of quick service, health-oriented fast food restaurant. And I noticed that people were coming in, grabbing some random meals off a shelf, scanning a barcode that was attached to the shelf and walking out. And that kind of really makes you pay attention to the fact that customers, if we look at the restaurant world, have very different expectations now versus a few years ago. So we're seeing this plethora of third-party ordering systems and third-party delivery services that I think there's certainly pros and cons to those services for the restaurants. There's very big fees tied to it, and there's issues with ownership of customer data. but it's very obvious watching that experience and reading all the news out there that restaurants are really reliant on these kind of operations happening inside of the restaurant, to the point where I'm sure they're reaching out to their point of sale providers and saying, are you able to enable this functionality for me, or do I need to go find somebody else that will? So I think the consumer expectations are driving restaurants to desire different technology, and the good VARs need to make sure they're keeping up with it. A second area that also involves customer experience and maybe also builds in some of the retail side as well is the whole aspect of mobility. So, Jim, we've been in this industry, well, all three of us have, for so many years, and we see a lot of things like RFID and mobility that are talked about as the next big thing, and it'll explode in the next year, and they don't. And some of these technologies need 2 or 3 times of really coming to light before they take off. Mobility has definitely had an impact. There's no doubt about it. But I feel like over the next couple of years, mobility, because of the desire to have personalization built into the experience and the ability to arm your associates working in your business with the same or better information than your customers have, mobility is becoming more necessary than ever.
Got it. And welcome, David. Is that your dog who's welcome to the podcast here today?
That will be Mason. I'll try the strategic use of the mute button for him.
Wonderful. No worries at all. Happy to have Mason join us. Can you expand a little bit on that third-party challenge that you're talking about? Is that what resellers need to do, is say, maybe I don't need to have all this capability, but I need to know what all the capabilities are and then do some partnering? How are resellers going to navigate that? And then I'll ask Rick, a reseller, how does he plan on navigating that? Is that a big challenge for him?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and say, I'm sorry, Rick, go on.
No, to David first, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So a lot of it is really TBD. So a lot of these services, if you take Uber Eats, for example, and I forget if Lyft calls theirs Eats as well, but the Lyft service and Postmates and all these other different services in both restaurants and retail, they've kind of created these services and are trying to go direct to the business. But what they found out pretty quickly was that, if you have to have 5 different tablets so you can feed in orders from 5 different systems that are sitting on the counter, it becomes a bit of a mess. And you have some other companies that have now cropped up and said, hey, we're going to take all these disparate data feeds and integrate them into the POS. So you can go down to 1 or 0 extra devices. That is an opportunity for the reseller to either do the integrations themselves, work with their ISVs to do the integrations, or perhaps even approach some of these vendors and partner with them. So I think there's opportunity there, but it's kind of a very explosive industry right now that isn't fully established, even though it's already very busy. So hopefully there's opportunity to make margin, but at least there's opportunity for differentiation. So when you walk into a restaurant, you don't just say, I have a POS system. You say, I have a POS system that'll integrate in 5 or 6 different services that are very highly used locally to help you get more business, and I'll make your process more efficient versus all these different tablets.
Got it. Great. And Rick, before you answer that question in terms of how you see this impacting, can you explain to our audience, are you in both retail and restaurants, more one than the other, just so they know what perspective you're coming from?
Yeah, so we're retail guys 100%. We don't do anything in hospitality.
Okay.
But I still think, that it's still a valid question, because there's lots of add-on services or, pretty high-tech startups that are offering, something to our customers or their customers, and that impacts the POS. So, David, you said the magic word in my mind in terms of how I evaluate who we're going to partner with, and that's differentiation. Is the person that we're looking at, do they offer us some kind of unique, protectable, competitive differentiation? And is it valuable to my customers? And thirdly, is there a profit opportunity in that? So competitive differentiation, that's like the first thing that enters my mind.
Got it. And what are some of the things, I guess, Rick, that you're seeing that I'm going to say you have to keep up with the Joneses, but that other folks are providing that's giving them a differentiation? Is it technology? Is it service? Is it all of the above? What are some of the biggest things that you're seeing that are, differentiating your competitors or that you're striving to differentiate from?
It's interesting. There's a lot of turbulence in the POS industry on the retail side. There's some big forces affecting our customer base, whether it's people like Amazon, or regulatory changes. That's a huge thing. And really, where we're hearing the most of the chatter is not really coming from what have traditionally been our competitors. It's been from, some of these third-party providers who are talking to our customers. They're a technology, but they're not necessarily point of sale. For example, third-party analytics companies. And how does that impact us? And what's our opportunity look like? And, how do we make sure that we stay relevant and involved? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember talking to a different reseller in the Midwest, and they were saying, I used to pitch against the same 4 or 5 guys. Like every deal we were going head to head with them. Now I see who the bid is out to, who they're talking to. He said 2 companies I've never even heard of before. Like it's hard to pitch against that because you don't know exactly who they are and what they do. So, well, gentlemen, thanks for talking about go ahead, Rick.
And 3 out of those 4 guys are gone. The original 4. Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. Right. Yeah. They're not bidding on anything anymore. They ended up working for somebody else. So thank you for talking about the next 18 to 24 months. David, I'll ask you this question that you can really say almost anything up until teleportation. Look beyond 2 years, and what's caught your eye from a technology standpoint that you think is going to have a big impact on the channel?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I think will have an impact in the future on the channel. It's hard to say exactly when, especially because the channel serves smaller businesses, which sometimes it's harder for them to innovate. Sometimes it's easier, but in these technologies, I think it's harder. So the first off is that there's a whole bunch of artificial intelligence related products that are hitting the market right now. One of I think the most visible ones out there is the whole Amazon Go type store, right? So they're really, I wouldn't say they're eliminating point of sale. They're eliminating the registers at the checkout experience. It doesn't mean that there isn't still checkout operating behind the scenes. A lot of that is powered by computer vision, which is then powered by artificial intelligence to figure out what you're picking up, how much it costs, and guiding that whole experience. So I do think you're going to see smaller businesses that desire that type of experience, especially as customers want a better experience in the store and minimum wage continues to go up, and it'll make more of a challenge for stores. So things like that, or in the restaurant world, you see McDonald's is actually buying up technology companies right now and becoming a technology company. They're doing things like recognizing who's driving up to the drive-thru. Are they male or female? Is there kids in the back? What kind of car is it? And they're offering different products in their digital menu board versus, what might be there for the customer before them. So it's really fascinating that these technologies aren't just being tried out in a couple of pilot stores. They're actually being rolled out by certain people right now. So I think that eventually over time, SMBs will want that same technology. And these are complicated technologies that VARs can actually make money on once they master them. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity going that direction in the future.
Okay, good. So AI, Rick, what do you see on the horizon 2 years and beyond?
Yeah, so I mean, it's maybe my initial response isn't a direct kind of technology thing, but in the next 5 years, I think we see a recession and again, some major pendulum swing in terms of regulation. And I think that's going to create opportunities for small merchants. I don't think that the landscape's going to look the same. And I think as a result, that's going to have a major impact on the technology. Anybody who newly comes into that business is going to have expectations, and so are their customers, about the type of technology that they're using. So I think that'll be very interesting. Specifically, David, you posted an article on LinkedIn the other day about robots in Walmart, right? So like automation. And I don't necessarily mean that has to be robots in the aisle. It's something as simple as electronic data interchange, moving data between suppliers and retailers for the sake of automation. This is another example of something that is somewhat novel right now, or if you use it, great. If you don't, no problem. I think these things are going to become requirements. And David said, minimum wage going up. The tight job market too. I mean, there's just so many reasons to become more efficient. I think some things that are, have caught my attention. Again, when it'll happen, who knows? But Facebook and Libra, for example, it's cryptocurrency, but imagine if Facebook could serve up an ad send somebody into the store who pays with Facebook's cryptocurrency, and Facebook can track and own that entire process from start to finish. Or another example, and this goes to the hospitality industry a little bit, and it would affect retail as well, but I mean, self-driving cars are, I think that's a 5 or so year deal. I mean, you can have a Tesla that drives itself pretty well now. But think about what that does to delivery, okay? And I don't mean that we'll do more delivery. I actually think maybe less of that will happen. If I want to drive 30 minutes to go to a restaurant and I have a car that'll take me there and I can play on my phone on the way, that is more of an incentive to do that than to have it delivered, and I can go out and have that experience. I think experiential hospitality and retail, I think that's going to continue to be a really, really big thing. I'm not just selling you something, I'm selling you an experience along with that something.
It's
so you guys,
the whole driver.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the whole self-driving car aspect too, because that might enable some businesses, but it might also kill some businesses too. So, if you think right now, if I'm going to do a 6-hour road trip up to see a family member, when I drive along the road, I'm usually stopping at a couple of restaurants or whatever it may be along the way to get coffee, food. Well, if I can program my car to just drive me there and I can go ahead and pass out and take a nap when we're confident with the technology, what happens to all those road trip type businesses too in the future? So I think that you really have to pay attention as a VAR too, what your territory is and where there's going to be businesses in the future and where there's not going to be businesses, and see if you need to adjust your geography accordingly and plan that in advance.
So talk about that challenge. So you guys talked about AI, you talked about automation, even talked about Facebook cryptocurrency, right? So David, you've worked with a lot of resellers over the years. How does a VAR stay on top of all that? What do they need to do now in order to be ready or a step ahead so they don't get beat by somebody else? That seems like an immense challenge when they're already, up to their neck taking care of customers.
It's funny because I often get quoted for telling people to watch more sci-fi during my presentations. Because if you look at, I think another huge trend, probably a little more than 4 years out, will be 3D printing a lot of your products and food. Not so different than how Star Trek replicates them on their ships, right? So that's always good inspiration right there for the future. But I think it's really just the ability to read a lot of articles, talk to a lot of colleagues, and be willing to actually go play with technology. The good thing about the point of sale industry is you have a lot of people that love tech and are willing to experiment with it. And also go see it in action in the early stores. When I mentioned earlier on that I'm going around this, arranging this store tour, you're seeing a lot of technology that may be adopted or may not be adopted on a wide basis. But if you don't go and check it out and play with it, you don't learn. Even the Amazon Go type experience, I always tell people, because I've been to a few of their stores now, I knew exactly what the technology does before I walked in the door, because we read about this stuff every day. And I'll tell you, that euphoric moment when I walked out of the store, I was like, wow. Even knowing it was coming, I just felt like that was really cool, the shopping experience right there. If you don't try it yourself, then you don't necessarily become motivated to learn it, and you don't necessarily really understand all the human elements and the technology elements behind it. So I'd say just experiment.
Okay. Rick, what's your take on that, and what are you doing to stay up to speed on all these different trends that might or might not happen, and who knows when?
Yeah, well, like David said, read a lot, go try it when possible. My advice to the folks out there, and I'll expand on it a little bit later with some of the other questions, but align yourself with the right partners as well, because like you said, Jim, you can't do everything yourself.
God, it's very important that you get the right partners and that you lean on them. You don't have to do everything yourself, because distributors and vendors are supplying a lot more these days than before. Here's a product, good luck, go get them, Tiger. There's a lot more services that they're providing.
Yep.
Got it. A couple other things that you guys mentioned I just wanted to expand upon. There's a reseller in the Southeast. I remember him saying, our company has been really good at identifying the trends that are going to happen. We just have no idea when. And then we don't know to what degree. And that seems to be a massive challenge all of us have. We're not going to be able to answer that on the podcast. And I'll also say, you mentioned McDonald's and their drive-through technology. So, David, I think I don't go to McDonald's very often. So I'm a vegetarian, but we had a festival at downtown Erie. My wife and daughter went to a Starbucks to get something. I went into the McDonald's there. Like, I hadn't been in McDonald's in probably a couple of years. Like I said, I'm a vegetarian. They don't sell a, Impossible Burger, Big Mac for me yet. But I go in there and a fist fight almost broke out because the service was too slow and the point of sale system wasn't tracking properly. And I actually walked out of there because these two guys were going at it like, you want to go? You want to go? Let's take this outside. I'm like, I'm going to race to there first. And so it seems like the technology can get in the way, but if there's things that folks can do to avoid and have it be brought to them, or like you said, get that great drive-through technology, it's going to be even better. It seems like folks are, I don't want to say detaching themselves, but they're having more of an experience with the retailer or the restaurant as they are with other people. I guess that seems to be a trend that's happening as well. They interact more with the technology or a kiosk or a website or an app rather than another human being. Are you guys seeing that as well?
So I would say I'm seeing that, but I'm not seeing that. And it really depends on the business. I think maybe I'll use part of the self-checkout analogy here. So how many, if you're in Home Depot, for example, or supermarkets, there's a lot of times where that self-checkout technology can be incredibly frustrating to use. So, you have to like take the item off the scale, put it back on. And this is coming from someone who's been in point of sale for 20 years, so over 20 years, and I still have problems using those systems quite frequently. That's an example where you put technology in and you've really subtracted from the customer experience. And they haven't done anything with that staff except lay them off, right? They haven't, done anything useful there. But there's ways to tastefully do it. There's ways where you can have, self-ordering systems that are there. So for the customers that know it and want to get through fast, they get through fast. And you can redeploy your labor to either get food out faster or go and greet people and see if they need help with the technology or suggest their personal favorite meal. Technology should be used as an enabler. All too often it's not. And I think that's a really important theme that I always talk to retail and hospitality businesses about. And some do well with it and some quite frankly don't.
Yeah, they can fumble the ball and do technology for technology's sake.
Yeah.
Let's talk Oh, go ahead, Rick.
I just had a quick comment. So in a lot of ways, I'd parallel what David just said. I disagree a little bit, though. I mean, I love self-checkout. The way I look at it is, where do you have human beings in a position where they can add value? So going back to Home Depot, man, I'm using the self-checkout if I can. I get out of there faster. And the person at the counter scanning barcodes doesn't add a lot of value in my book. Now, in the aisle, when I'm trying to figure out how to, put a footer in sand properly, heck yeah, give me an employee. That I want to talk to a human being. That's value. So there's my perspective.
Got it. Thank you. So we started talking about technology. Now let's talk about business strategy. So we published a post on the RSPA blog that was titled VARs Understand Strategic Durability and then Revamp Your Business Plan. And so that post says essentially there are two paths forward for VARs. One path is stop selling to micro merchants and focus on the SMB or large chain merchants. So that's one avenue. The other one is run very lean internally, meaning maximize automation, minimize staff size, and then you can sell predominantly into a niche vertical. I guess, Rick, we'll start with you. What's your take on that? Do you see that those are the two paths? Are there additional paths? Are there different paths? And feel free to disagree with me if you like.
Sure. So there might be different paths, but I think you prescribed, two solid paths. I mean, it's one that we prescribe to ourselves. So, I mean, I think both of what you've said are niche. It's just either way you're tailoring either to a large organization or to a vertical industry. I think niche is going to become more and more important to VARs and ISVs because it's going to be more and more important to your customers. If your technology does not give them a competitive edge in the specific industry that they serve, then, good luck trying to be all things to all people. That's my take.
Got it. David.
Yeah, so I have a couple of perspectives on the paths that you mentioned, and also I would say maybe even an additional path. And they're kind of, yes or no. So the micro merchant space is hard, and I would say arguably become the most commoditized size of merchant with a lot of these online and payment processor backed systems that are out there. But at the end of the day, service hasn't been commoditized. Good, genuine service hasn't truly been commoditized as much as these companies like to say they have. So there still is money to be made at micro merchants, but I think the important thing is that you monetize it via recurring revenue and payments. So as you capture these merchants, you don't need to necessarily be reselling them a service contract every year, which takes a lot of time. I think that's an important piece. And if you're not capable of doing that, micro merchants just might not be the right fit for you. And I think you also mentioned, Jim, the running lean aspect.
Yes. Yeah. Embracing automation.
Right. And so I'm a little mixed on that, but I would say overall, I'll give you an example again. So my good friend and retired colleague, Mark Olson, who was until recently the president of APG Castro, I got a tour of their plant at one point in time, which is pretty automated, but obviously as humans to do the things that are, require a human and are a little, more difficult and require that skill. And one of the last things he showed me during the tour was a dumpster in the back. It's a recycling dumpster where they had pieces of sheet metal, small pieces of sheet metal. Why did he show that to me? And it was actually a good lesson that I probably took a little while to remember. He was mentioning there that they're basically their excess sheet metal, which costs them money. Every little piece they throw out means they didn't actually use it, in order to build a Castro over there. So the theme there is that he had it to a really, really, really small amount, right? So like, I don't remember the exact number. Maybe it was 1% of the steel they brought in is actually put into the excess bin out the back. And he said, our next goal is to reduce that by 10%. A good business leader needs to make sure that their organization is running as lean as it possibly can at all times, regardless if you're small or big or good or bad business owner. That being said, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have bandwidth in place for innovation and exploration, but you have to have the right size team for that. I would say I personally learned the hard way at PC America when the Great Recession hit, that we were kind of forced to, run lean when we had not been doing that previously. I think another path that business owners can follow as well is to maybe look into adding services. And Rick actually put it perfect earlier in the conversation when he said, hey, what vendors can I partner with? What can they bring to my business? So you already have existing customers. And if you have existing customers, what more can you sell to them? You don't necessarily need to look out at getting a whole bunch of new customers to grow your business or make it more sustainable. You need to make sure that you can also find complementary things that you can offer to those customers that help them rely on you more and also help you drive in more revenue.
Got it. Thank you for that. And so, Rick, David brought up, something about at all times, you need to be running lean at all times. And so is that how you view it as well? It's not just, when times are tough or when you guys have both mentioned recession. It's not only during a recession. You're always running lean and mean but when you're innovation, you try to innovate. But there's no time to waste money or waste materials, as Dave brought up in the example. Is that a key lesson you think for anybody listening to our podcast here?
I'm not sure. Obviously you don't want to throw money in the trash can. On the other hand, we do a lot of experimentation here, and if you ride that line too hard, like every penny is going to be saved, I feel like you're going to strangle your employees, your team's willingness to try things and take some risks. We have to be responsible. Money's not growing on trees for sure. On the other hand, if there's a trade-off to be made for a responsible amount of money that's wasted on a failed experiment in pursuit of a better way or growth, then, so be it. So you got to be a little careful with pushing that, but obviously, absolutely, everywhere that you can save, you should.
Yeah, no, I know. I 100% agree there. When I was saying run lean, I'm definitely a big believer in investment. I think it's Google that lets their employees spend 10% of their time on experimentation. And when I say run lean, it doesn't mean cut back on that. It just means you have to understand where you want to cut back on. So if you only need, a maximum of 5 service technicians and you're employing 8, you're probably not, gauging all your metrics properly to be the most responsible for your business. And of course, paying employees, I would say, fairly and paying them well means you have retention. So it doesn't mean skidding back what they get paid or what they have. But at the same time, you got to have the right people in place and the right number of people.
Right. It has to be efficient and effective. It's got to be both of those things. You can't just cut all the way back. And people are an investment, because oftentimes if you get high caliber employees, you don't have to hire as many average employees, because those high caliber ones are the ones who are making up for it. Rick, last point on this, please.
We're good. You said it perfectly.
Got it. Good. Stole it, mental telepathy right there. Hey, we're going to pause here for a moment to let our listeners know that an RSPA membership has never been more valuable or more affordable. The RSPA recently expanded its VAR and ISV member benefits to include discounts on health insurance, HR services, office supplies, and shipping. Also, RSPA members now have access to a legal advisor, security advisor, sales coach, and a VAR and ISV business advisor. That's all included in your annual RSPA membership, which for resellers starts at just $250 a year. Can you guess how much that is a day? Can you do the math real quick? 68 cents a day for these high-value services. It wasn't a game show. I just was trying to see if you guys could jump in and figure it out. Without an RSPA membership, you'll either spend thousands of dollars paying an outside consultant who doesn't know the channel, or you'll end up going it alone during these turbulent times in our industry. For more information, visit www.gorspa.org, and don't forget to save the date for Retail Now 2020, August 2nd through 5th at the Venetian in Las Vegas. Retail Now is where the industry meet. So thank you for that break, gentlemen. A few more questions for you. What mistakes do you see resellers making today that doesn't prepare them for the future? I guess, David, if we can go with you first. What are you seeing from that standpoint, whether it's little mistakes or even it could be a colossal mistake that resellers are making that isn't paving their way for a more profitable future?
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes I often see out there from a lot of businesses is that they don't necessarily keep in touch with their customers. And, that can really be a big, bad thing for your business because your current customers should continue to be your customers. So, if you have a business out there that goes and installs the system and, it seems like it's working and maybe it is working fine, but they don't constantly, not every day, but get in front of their customers in different ways. It could be an in-person visit or a phone call. It could be sending out a weekly newsletter so their brand is visible and relevant. Then it's possible their customers may forget some of the benefit of working with that reseller. And it's funny because if they're having a lot of problems and the reseller fixes them, they actually might be very visible to the customer and really appreciated. The customer that doesn't have any issues might almost in a way not appreciate the reseller as much because they don't ever hear from them. So that I think is a really big piece of advice. And even when things are going good, get in front of them. I like the idea of, for example, you can send your customer let's say they've placed no service calls in 6 months, which is great for the customer and it's great for the reseller. Send them a little gift and say thank you for being a customer. Hey, by the way, you're 6 months problem free, because that'll trigger that thought in that customer's head, wow, I have been problem free. This reseller did a good job. So I think that's an area of opportunity for a lot of resellers. And especially if your customers are on recurring revenue, you need to keep those customers happy. You might be automatically getting paid, but they have to consistently see who you are and the value of that.
Got it. Great. David, Rick, what's your take on mistakes that you see resellers making?
I wouldn't say it's as much a mistake as a vulnerability, but, in the last 2 years, I've seen and heard, many horror stories of resellers having the rug get pulled out from under them. I have a friend in the industry who had a credit card processing portfolio it was significant. It was huge amounts of money. And I think the company was having some, financial or cutback issues, and loophole in the contract allowed them to stop paying that residual just completely spontaneously. And they really had no recourse, it sounded like. So the recommendation, the first one is easy. If you're an RSPA member, you need to have Bob Goldberg on speed dial. He's the lawyer for the RSPA, super good guy, sharp guy. Your contracts need to protect you. And I think a lot of people, especially smaller shops, they get that contract from one of their partners and they just sign it and move on. And, when they get acquired by Fiserv or whoever, the rules of the game, the people you're working with before might not be there anymore. The second thing that kind of parallels with this is, and I hope that we see a lot of this in the industry, but you find ways to partner, to have relationships with ISVs or whoever, where you get some kind of skin in the game. What's good for the company making the product you sell has to be good for you. Hunter Allen and his group acquiring equity in Cinetouch, I think that's magical. A bunch of really good resellers taking an equity stake in the ISV that they're going to push. I think that's super cool. So we're going to keep our eye on that, as we engage the channel with our product. It's something that's definitely on our mind. So as a reseller, you've got to find partners that are truly willing to align with you.
And so the things that you guys mentioned fall back to two key principles. Like you said, David, about staying close to your customers. I've always said there's no substitute for a competent person getting closer to a situation, right? So at a certain distance, you're going to be wrong or you're not going to have the right information. So you've got to make sure you get close, however you do that. And then to your point, Rick, we talked earlier about saving money. You don't cut back on legal advice, right? You don't say, oh, I'm going to go, get something. This guy's local or he's a friend of mine. You don't do that with legal advice. You don't do that with surgeons either, right? Why'd you go to that surgeon? Well, they were cheaper. I had a coupon. Like that is a major problem. And too many times people look to cut expenses there as opposed to somewhere else. So two business principles. Let me throw it out to you guys as well. You talked about other people making mistakes. All three of us have run small businesses at times, our own businesses. What mistakes have you made, or what's a big mistake that you made running your business that you kind of wish you could do over? Rick, why don't you take this one first?
Sure. So, there's so many. The list is so long. But one lesson that I think is something a lot of people could benefit from hearing is that, I think I waited too long to build out repeatable processes. At the time I viewed us as safe, when there was 4 of us a long time ago. And it's like you can read each other's minds. Like, what do I need a written process or procedure for? That was my time. That was my thinking at the time. Like, try to go get the next deal or get something done. But I think that was a mistake that hindered our ability to grow. And even if growth isn't your number one priority, like it is for us right now, if you want to go on a vacation and you're a 4-man crew, it's easier when you've got well-established, repeatable processes. So that would be some advice.
All right, good. Rick, David.
Yeah, so I guess if I look back at the PC America days, one mistake that I think we made, and it's not completely unique to an ISV, but somewhat maybe, is I think that we supported or we offered too many third-party products. We integrated to every payment processor out there. We worked with almost every known major manufacturer of hardware. And it was opportunistic. We did a lot of those interfaces to capture, I would say, some short-term revenue or short-term deals. But we learned the hard way that there was a very long-term legacy carrying cost to support those things on an ongoing basis. Because you may have those few customers that you captured and had a great month. Well, now you got to keep that interface live for the next 5 years. So what was a great short-term investment was a legacy cost that was ultimately not profitable in some cases long-term. So that was a lesson for us, and I think it's relevant to VARs too. If you're really servicing, hardware or software, if you have too many things in your portfolio, it just might not be a good idea unless you really have thought it out for the long term.
We call that wind resistance here. We try to avoid that at all costs.
What do you call it, wind resistance? Can you explain that a little bit more?
David probably can empathize, but every time you tack something like that on, it drags you down. You are not as streamlined as you were before. Your gas mileage goes down. You want to talk about conserving or being lean? Support a product, something you built out or tailored for one customer one time 5 years ago, and where's the guy who originally did that? Oh, he's not on the team anymore. Well, somebody else has to figure it out, et cetera, et cetera. Not fun.
And that's kind of the allure of a startup, right? And startups are always called agile because they don't have any customers and they don't have any, legacy stuff out there to support. So of course they're by nature going to be more agile until they start winning some customers, and then, they turn into a traditional company.
Yeah, and so you guys, thank you for sharing those, the mistakes. The one that I'll share, and Rick might be able to guess what it is hiring the wrong people. And so when I was self-employed, I was just the least worst person who showed up or the cheapest person, and that's the salespeople who I had hired. And the one never sold anything, then asked for an advance on his pay. I, of course, like needed a salesperson, so I gave him an advance on his pay and never heard from him again. And so I learned my lesson the hard way in those terms. You really got to raise the level of the people that you hire. And David, do you know how Rick and I met? Have you ever heard that story about how Rick and I first crossed paths?
Do I want to hear the story?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. It has to do with hiring. So I published a book, I guess it was 8 years ago, called Hire Like You Just Beat Cancer, about hiring best practices. And so sold it on Amazon. And so I would look and see, you know, what my sales were on Amazon. And I got a review. And it's by some guy named Rick F. And I'm like, I don't know anybody named Rick. Like, who is this? And this very nice review about the book. And I'm like, I couldn't track the person down. And then it was at the RSPA. I think it was the new member reception or right before the welcome reception. And Rick comes up to me and says, hey, I'm the guy who left your Amazon review. I'm, oh my gosh, like it was so great. You know, it's one of those funny things. Like if you're a stand-up comedian, people are going to applaud or boo or say nothing, and know the instant reaction. You buy a book, you're just kind of like, I don't know, you know, you write a book. And so to have somebody leave, you know, a favorable review and then Rick come up and see me, it was a great thing, both in the industry and all that stuff. So I've always been indebted to Rick just for that one gracious thing that he did for me.
Good deal. But we still use your process for hiring, and I would genuinely recommend that book. Hiring's not easy, and that's a great resource.
I appreciate that, and I'll also say for RSPA members, we have all sorts of other resources that I'm able to provide for them in addition to the book, and all sorts of employee hiring process and interview lists and assessment tools and things like that. Happy to give direction on that if folks want to work out. So we've only got a few minutes left. Let me ask this question. So let's talk about your leadership journeys. And so at RSPA Inspire in 2015, Chip Heath was a speaker, and he and his brother Dan wrote a great book called The Power of Moments. And David, I'll ask you this first. Can you point to a moment in your life or your career that was a turning point or a catalyst for you?
Yes, I would say it was probably buying my company. So it was a family-owned company owned by my father as well as his business partner, and me and my business partner bought the company. And so we finish the transaction, and then we go deliver the news to the employees, and some people are sad and everything else, and then the prior owners leave, and there we are sitting in front of a baker's dozen number of employees right there, thinking, oh my God, I have to figure out how to pay you and feed your kids, and it's just a wow moment, and it's kind of like a make or break moment. I had a lot of ideas that I always try to push, up the chain at the company prior, but now I was ultimately responsible for delivering them and for dealing with failures and everything else. And that just matures you as a business person like in seconds. And it was stressful, but it was energizing. It was scary, but it was exciting. And that it just forces you to learn new skills and basically overnight. So that would definitely be, I'd say, one of my biggest like catalysts right there to my career and my life.
The owner of Jameson Publishing would tell the steering committee meeting. So Jameson Publishing published Business Solutions magazine. I worked there for almost 18 years, and he would say, "This is not a drill. This is real. The decisions we make will impact people's lives. Like, pay attention, take it seriously." So I'm feeling what you're saying there. Rick, what was the catalyst for you? What was a big moment for you in your career?
So that exhilaration David mentioned, I feel privileged that in my job I feel that daily, weekly, very often. But I would say one of the major turning points for us is we started out solely as a VAR. We're a VAR ISV now. Selling Microsoft RMS. We did very well with that, and obviously there's huge amounts of turbulence in our industry. And, the kind of writing on the wall that Microsoft was going to start exiting the small, medium retail space, we decided to make our own point of sale product. It's just 5 or 6 years ago now. But that was a pretty monumental shift for us, obviously. I would say in terms of the thinking, though, one of the things that, I would encourage, people watching this to think about their business the same way. We stopped thinking about how are we going to close the next deal and make more money. to how are we going to increase the value of our business? What is what we're about to do next, or the decision we're going to make? How is that going to impact the value of our business? And David, that goes back to your kind of comments about, let's be opportunistic and support some new integration in order to close this deal. What does that do to the value of your business? So I think that was a major turning point for us.
Got it. Interesting mindset. So my last two questions for you guys are quick. So first, can you recommend for our audience a book to read or a podcast to listen to that's going to help them in their leadership journey and their business journey? David first, please.
I'm going to recommend How Do You Hire Like You Just Beat Cancer by Jim Roddy. It really is a fantastic book, actually. I've read it as well, and I have an autographed copy, which is pretty cool. It's up on eBay if you want it. I'm just kidding. Beyond that, I'll go back to not a specific book or podcast, but I'm going to go back to my sci-fi reference. I'm known for saying it a bunch of times, but one of the presentations I give, I actually cite this whole scenario, and I'll go quickly through it. But where this couple of people are caught on video going into a restaurant that actually is fully automated ordering in front. There's no people. So they go in, they sit down, they have trouble with the system, but they eventually get their order placed, and the food gets delivered by a robot. And this is all captured on video. And they're not happy with their order. So they can't find anybody to complain to. So the guy walks into the kitchen to complain to the chef, and it's actually all robotic chefs. So afterwards, they go back to their table, and when they're checking out for payment, and they're pretty unhappy, it actually says, how much do you want to tip? And they don't leave a tip. And then they get chased out of the restaurant by the robot. So, okay, wasn't a real life situation, but could it be one day? It was actually a recent X-Files episode. X-Files came back for a couple of seasons in the last few years. And it's a fascinating look at where the world can really go. And those lessons, even they're a bit funny and dreamy at times, are going to become very real. And some of them already have. So
all right. That is not the answer I would have expected, but I love it. Rick, do you have a more traditional answer, or yours along? You're going to say Star Trek or Star Wars, or?
So in terms of predicting the future, I'd stick with Star Trek more than Star Wars.
Okay.
And David's response, I think is good. It's a fair point. In terms of what I would tell people to a book, if I had to recommend one book,
podcast. Yep.
Yeah, I'd say Built to Sell. It relates to a lot of the comments that I made today. Even if you don't think of yourself as somebody that read books, guaranteed you can get through that thing quick. It's an easy read and a valuable lesson.
And what's the valuable lessons that you get out of Built to Sell?
Think about how to increase the value of your business. Even if you don't intend on selling your business, the positive impacts that can have on you from a profit standpoint or a management ability to manage your business standpoint. So it goes back to that repeatable process and that kind of decision-making change, that epiphany we had when we started to become an ISV.
Got it. Great. So my last question is, from 1% to 100%, the chances that I'm going to see you at Retail Now August 2nd through 5th in Las Vegas. David?
Well, I haven't missed one in over a decade. So it's 110% for me. And, I think the biggest thing about it is that I learn from colleagues every single time I go. I meet some new people. I meet up with people that I've known for a long time. Every single time you're learning something new from all those experts around the industry that are there. And it's, to me, an indispensable event. So 110% for me.
All right, 110%. Rick, two questions for you. First, did we win you over? Because early on you were like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this conversation or not. You were still, the jury was out. Are you okay now? Are you better? You closer?
Yeah. The Star Trek references that improve things for me. So I like that. That's good.
Nice. And what are the chances you're going to be at Retail Now from 1 to 100%?
Well, since David's going, I'm going to go too, I guess.
Nice.
I'll go. You'll see me there. Say hi to me if you see me there, if you're watching.
Absolutely.
Good. David is one of those A players who is the magnet who draws other people. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for the conversation. Really enjoyed talking with you today, and we hope our listeners enjoyed our discussion as well. If you did, please be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. We'd also appreciate if you'd rate us wherever you find your favorite podcast. The more stars, the better. And if you'd like to learn more best practices for VARs and ISVs in the point of sale channel, check out the RSPA blog. You can find it at www.gorspa.org and then clicking on RSPA blog. Before we go, thanks again to David and Rick for sharing their wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSPA Marcom Manager Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the point-of-sale ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, please visit our website at www.gorspa.org. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening and watching.
Thank you.